Oh, here we go. Kinesiology 223. This is chapter 12. We're still talking about introduction to, or this is still an introduction to psychological skills training. And this is presentation number 6. And specifically, we're going to talk a little bit more about the who and the when regarding psychological skills training. All right, let's get into it. So optimally, a sports psychology consultant, an SPC, would be part of the coaching team. Now, the SPC itself is somebody who's highly qualified to work with athletes, has a background uh, in psychology, and they list, some of the requirements for individuals who might have like certifications. Uh, and you look at like the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, you have certification by the AASP, ensures a certain level of experience, background, and competence. And that's great. But I will tell you that many times when you get into a coached environment, unless you're a big program, or perhaps you're in a college environment, or you have other specialists who are willing to be involved, like in our environment on a college, as a coach, I could reach out to the Office of Psychology and ask if anybody would be interested in doing contact hours with our athletes, right? It's a real easy way to reach across campus and kind of bridge that gap between two different silos on campus. But it's a way to also allow their students in the psychology program to work with our student athletes and be able to work on psychological skills training. Now, I would say that what usually happens is this: you have a coach on staff who has kind of a background in coaching, a minor in coaching. Maybe they were at a major in college in psychology, but they don't have any certifications. And it becomes a little bit of a pet project, because this coach takes it upon themselves to implement psychological skills training with their athletes. And it becomes something where they just become more ingrained in the actual athletic department. But usually it's specific to their own team. And unfortunately, it's usually a person who's just not as qualified as many of the people you see here. Nonetheless, it still has its place if you do it correctly as a coach. You can still do it correctly as a coach. You just have to be a little bit more self-aware on how to integrate psychological skills training. Now, when you look at SPC, the SPC was first found on page 277 in the book, and it's kind of quirky. I'm just going to jump out to that real quick. So hold on one second, my friends. That is cut in. I jumped out to the book, did a screen grab, and I pasted it right back here. So you see this in the book in one of these breakout boxes where you have sports psychology consultant. You get pretty far into the chapter before they even divulge what it is, and they don't divulge it in the main text. They actually divulge it in one of these breakout boxes. But go ahead and take a read to this, because sports psychology consultants, they definitely have their place in the big picture. And when they're utilized correctly as part of the team itself, it is to the benefit of the program, no doubt. Now, the upside is when you start talking with a coach, they're going to have a higher touch factor with the athletes. They can easily administer the psychological skills training, and they can do so with regular intervals within the context of a practice environment. And when you have a SPC who is doing it, that person might only be able to come in once a week. They might have some limitations in their schedule and how many people they can actually work with. And if you are able to work with your athletes on a regular basis, as we've talked about many times, you're actually reinforcing those positive behaviors that you want more effectively. Whereas a person that might come in and a little bit on a longer time window, like the SPC, you'll have that person maybe come in once a month or once every other week, whereas your coaches can implement things in. Now, this is to say that your coaches will also be meeting with your sports professional, right? Your sports psychology coach. And as a result, they will have interventions as well. Optimally, what you'd like to have is you have your sports performance consultant or coach meet with your athletes, but also meet with the coaches to be able to reinforce the very things he's teaching with the athletes, right? So you can have this two-tiered approach, and you have the athletes have an intervention and the coaching staff also has an intervention. But what normally happens is you have the coach implementing, and the coach can implement with a higher degree of contact. It does present a little bit of a conflicted situation because he might be exposed to perhaps personal information about the student athlete that can cause some type of bias. You don't have the confidentiality that you normally would have with a sports performance consultant or coach, and you end up, or sports psychology coach, and you have a different or fundamental approach in terms of teaching mental skills, right, as opposed to having psychological skills training. So there's a little bit different verbiage there when you start looking at who is actually doing the teaching. It's not to say it's wrong for a coach to have these interventions. It's not to say it's right to have a coach, but or let's say it's wrong for the coach to have an intervention and it's wrong to have just the SPC do it. But I will tell you, you can have a well integrated program if you have the coaches on staff. They're also meeting, as I mentioned. You have a message that's being delivered broad based to the athletes, and the coaches are supporting that information. But usually, what it comes down to is you have a coach on staff who handles psychological skills training. Now, with the athletes themselves, the interaction is there daily. And so look at this from the other side of the ledger, right? Not just the coaching side, but the athletes. And if you have an athlete who perhaps is having some challenges and they're constantly reaching out to their coach saying, Coach, I'm having a problem. I'm having a block. I can't see the ball as well. I'm not seeing the seams when they're throwing, when the pitcher's throwing. The basket looks, like the size of a tomato soup can. I'm really struggling here. It becomes a case where that coach has to make a decision in terms of investing time in that one athlete or investing time in the team. Now, at that moment, the team prevails, but the coach can have a one-on-one with that athlete. Now, sometimes that athlete starts to then develop a codependent relationship with their coach, and they're constantly going to their coach and seeking out affirmation from their coach because perhaps they didn't get it anywhere else earlier in their life. That is a very real scenario that does happen when a coach takes on this type of role. So the athletes themselves, as a team, can start to look at maybe one of their peers as being a negative on the team because he is seeking out that affirmation and he's seeking out so much support. And it becomes a bit of a rift on the team. Anyways, in some regards, and I agree with the book here, the coaching and sports psychologist role should be separated whenever possible. And I do agree with that. And if it's something where even you can have like the psychology department on campus come over and do interventions with your athletes, what a great way to be able to just reach across silos on a college campus. So they list 6 behaviors of coaches, and they look at this in terms of when the coaches are trying to teach mental skills and psychological skills training. So coaches, watch the athletes and they watch the athletes use their mental skills, etc. And they talked about targeted cueing for mental skills. It's about coaches giving athletes instructions of a psychological nature without providing a formal explanation. Just do this, and it's basically didactic. Go do this, and that's all it is. Or draconian might be a better word. Giving instructions to use mental skills, directly instructed the athletes to use a particular skill. Make sure you do some imagery before practice. Reinforcing mental skill use. Coaches continually reminded the athletes to use mental skills and regularly repeated instruction about mental skills. Coach was repetitive every week. Every training session, coach reminded the athlete. Now notice, this is different than just like a one-off, which I think has its place and is where it is of greater value. Providing explanations of mental skills. The coaches explain to the athletes how to use these skills. I would even contest that within this number 5 here. It should be what mental skills are and not only how to use them, but how they benefit the athlete. And then seeking athlete involvement. Coaches gave athletes choices of mental skill exercises so they have not only introduced, described, explained, and then gave them the ability to understand what each one of these different mental skills is or are. The coach then gave them the choice. They have the autonomy, if you can think of that word from a number of lectures we've had. They've given the athletes the autonomy to choose a particular mental skill exercise, to be able to have their own self-intervention, and then have a discussion with them afterwards to review what worked best, what didn't work best. So in some regards, when you look at psychological skills training, it becomes a little bit of a combination between the coach and the athlete. And I still contest that there may be a third party involved in there when you have somebody who's a sports psychology consultant who comes in. So the best practice is to implement during the off season when the athlete can focus on PST. And think about this, if you're talking about having a heavy lifting, if you will, of trying to teach these different skills and understand what all these things are and how to integrate in mental training and what the process is. And you're trying to practice and you're trying to get to practice and play games, etc. It might be too much. And usually a coach will attempt to implement these things during the season, perhaps when an athlete is going through a slump and they're having trouble hitting, or the team has gone through a 10-game losing streak, or any number of different scenarios where the coach is trying to have an intervention at that moment, which is not bad to try to do something different to make change in the actual context of the environment. But if you really want to get the most out of PST, you'll need to start the process in the preseason to learn more about the skills, and then you can then supplement, or if you will, complement that going forward into the preseason, into the actual competitive season, and then to the playoffs, etc., because you've done the heavy lifting, so to speak, in the preseason mode. And it doesn't take much. I mean, once you've integrated in the understanding on the front end, you'll be able to then better implement little key coaching points during the season. Should continue throughout an athlete's sports participation. The learning of psychological skills should progress from practices and simulations to actual competitions. I agree with that. That constant open communication has to happen with your athletes. And sometimes they're hard conversations to have, but you have to have them. What did you think, or what were you seeing when you shot those free throws? Right? That becomes a whole nother conversation between you and your athlete. But understand that those conversations are completely based on the coach-athlete relationship that's been built and nurtured from the very beginning and everything we talked about. And it comes from trust, honesty, and communication. All right, guys, signing off of this one, moving on to the next one.